All right, welcome to our explainer. Today, we're going to try and make sense of one of the most significant conflicts of our time. We're going to break down the complex geopolitical thinking behind Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine based on our source material. And it really all boils down to one huge question. So, yeah, this is the question, right? Why do it? I mean, it's so easy to just see the headlines and not think deeper. But when a country makes a move this big, with consequences this catastrophic, you have to believe there's a powerful, powerful reason behind it. You know, for any nation, war is the absolute last resort. It's chaos. It's risking pretty much everything. So to figure out why Russia would roll those dice, we have to look at this conflict from a slightly different angle. And this is maybe the most important frame to understand from our source material. The demands Russia made right before the invasion, they weren't really aimed at Kiev. They were aimed squarely at Washington and NATO. So this isn't just about two countries. It's a massive geopolitical chess match, and Ukraine is, tragically, the board. Okay, so to really get this, we've got to rewind the clock a bit. Russia and Ukraine, they aren't just neighbors. Their history, their culture, their people, it's all tangled together, which honestly just makes this whole thing even more tragic. So the Soviet Union collapses in '91, and boom, Ukraine is an independent country. But for years, it stays super close to Russia. How close? Well, in 1994, Ukraine gives up its entire nuclear arsenal, which was the third largest in the world, by the way, and hands it over to Russia. And for the next couple of decades, right up until 2014, its governments were pretty much always pro-Moscow. Something else that's super important to remember is that Ukraine itself isn't, one single block. Our source points out that a big chunk of the population, about 30%, especially out in the east right next to Russia, are ethnically Russian. They speak Russian, and they've always felt a stronger connection to Moscow. And this division, it's a huge part of the story. And then 2014 happened. That was the year everything broke. It really set the stage for everything that was to come. So what lit the fuse? It was this one decision. The president at the time, Yanukovych, was pro-Russian. He decided to walk away from a huge trade deal with the European Union, and the country just erupted. The protests got so big, so intense, that Yanukovych literally had to flee the country. And that changed everything. From that moment on, any politician in Ukraine knew one thing for sure. The path to power wasn't through Moscow anymore. It was through the West. The country started to pivot hard. Economically, politically, everything started pointing towards Europe and away from Russia. Now, Ukraine looking west was a problem for Moscow. But the real five-alarm fire, the absolute non-negotiable red line, was Ukraine talking about joining NATO. So let's just quickly recap what NATO is, right? It's a military alliance, and the core idea is simple. An attack on one is an attack on all. That means if you attack, say, Latvia, you're also attacking the United States. It's a huge security guarantee. Now, you have to see this from the perspective our source lays out. NATO was created for one reason, to counter the Soviet Union. But then the Soviet Union disappeared, and NATO didn't. Instead, it started expanding eastward, right up to Russia's borders, pulling in old Soviet allies. And that's why Ukraine was the tipping point. Look at this number, 2,300 kilometers. That's the length of the border they share. If Ukraine joins NATO, you suddenly have a rival military alliance, your main rival, all along that massive, incredibly important border. For Moscow, this wasn't just a concern. It was seen as an existential threat.
Okay, so to make this feel less like an abstract chess game, the source gives this analogy. Just think about it for a second. Imagine if Russia and Mexico signed a military treaty, and then Russia started putting military bases and missiles right near the US border.
The question just hangs there, doesn't it? How would the United States respond? It really forces you to think about how any great power would react to what it sees as a major threat right on its doorstep. So this all brings us right to the brink. Tensions are sky high, and Russia lays its cards on the table. This was it. This was the last chance for a diplomatic solution. And these weren't vague suggestions. Russia made three very specific, very clear demands. Not to Ukraine, but to the US and NATO. Basically, stop all military activity in Eastern Europe, give us a legally binding promise that Ukraine will never join NATO, and pull back any missiles that could threaten us. And, well, those demands were rejected. And this is where our source shifts focus. away from the maps and the strategy and towards the very real, very human cost. It makes this powerful point. These are ego games played by leaders. But the price? The price is paid by someone else, by ordinary people whose lives are on the line.
Because at the end of the day, after all the strategy and geopolitics are done, this is the one truth that remains. Leaders, they'll eventually shake hands. They'll find a new normal. But the families who've lost someone, they will never, ever get them back. And that's a devastating reminder of the real price of all of this.